Well, thank you all. Thank you all for making the time today and inviting us to talk about this new-ish core within the Cancer Center. And we call ourselves BC Squared, as you can see, for Biospecimen Collection and Banking Core, because BC Squared is a heck of a lot easier to say. So today we're going to cover how and why BC Squared was created, how we're organized and which facilities are included and which services are included. And also finally, at the end, you'll learn how to get hold of us if you have any questions or special requests. So why was BC Squared created? Well, first of all, what we had prior to March or April of this year was a conglomeration of multiple small, quote unquote, banks of tissue in a variety of places. And it was very clear that, first of all, none of them could grow independently, that if they tried to do that, there would be an immense redundancy of staff, et cetera. And also that we would all benefit from actually being under one umbrella with a single database. So basically, again, the goal here is to optimize resources and to increase in-house team member support. And basically, we had some situations where literally team members felt they couldn't even take vacations because there was nobody to cover what they were doing while they were gone, which is obviously not a situation we want to be in. And finally, and most importantly, to provide state-of-the-art biospecimen collection and banking support to further the research efforts, both here within the entire Cancer Center, but also out to a lesser degree outside of IU. Here's the org chart, and it's fairly flat. I was tapped on the shoulder, if you will, to do this because approximately 15 years ago, I founded and I have been marshaling the Susan G. Komen Tissue Bank, which is a bank of normal breast specimens. So the powers that be figured anybody that was crazy enough to ask women to have biopsies of their breasts for banking purposes when they weren't sick should be able to get all of this under one umbrella. So that's how I came to be the director. Jill Henry is our operations manager and really deals very effectively with the day-to-day processes. And then we've split ourselves into what already is, when I talk about the individual components of this, what already blends them, if you will. So we've got, initially there was thought about having a data person separate from a regulatory person. It turns out that the two areas are actually very intertwined, and Emily has expertise in both. There was no original thought to communication, outreach, and recruitment. And Kathy Ridley Merriweather is actually a scholar and published expert in this area. And we felt it would be really important to have someone worrying about both communication and actually outreach to be able to really push within, and you'll hear our overall plan, but really to help the community as a whole and that is the patients, understand the importance both of research in general and then of specimen collection within that research. And then finally, the most technical of all the positions is the biospecimen collection manager, and that is being done by Pam Rocky. So the four components of BC Squared are tissue procurement, the Komen Tissue Bank, ORION and total cancer care, and finally, the laboratory techs that work and collect specimens, biospecimens within the clinical trials office for the cancer center. I'm going to go through each of these in a little bit of detail. I'm happy to, if people have questions as we go along, certainly to pause, and I'll have Jill do that if she sees questions in the chat that I need to be addressing. So tissue procurement was the old, if you will, procurement setup that was collecting tumor specimens across the board. And so this team actually connects with and consents surgical patients preoperatively, obviously, to get access to their tumor specimens. Again, it's primarily at this point cancer specimens. There's a list of cancers that we are prioritizing over other cancers, in that so there are two levels that we can see here. One, we work with researchers to do custom collections. So if someone, for example, is doing a special project on sarcomas and needs a certain type of sarcoma, they would make an application to us, and then we would see that those specimens are collected according to the instructions that the individual scientist provides us. And then more broadly, as I was starting to say before, we collect samples in the operating room from cancer patients for archival tumor banking. And almost every cancer center in the country has a tumor bank. We do this not across the board on every single cancer patient. We're not staffed to do that yet. So there is a priority list of tumor specimens, pretty much dictated by where most of the research is being done. So this is some specifics. And if you look on the left side of the screen, you can see that in 2021 thus far, we have collected a total of almost 2,000 biospecimens for 24 principal investigators. Now, about 1,200 of these were collected, again, for, if you will, for general use, and about 650 were collected for very specific use by individual investigators. And you can see that as it splits out, most of these specifically requested specimens, most of them went to the NCI. We have a contract with the National Cancer Institute whereby they have a list of tumors and specific annotated tumors that they would like us to share with them. And so we are compensated for that. So most of these are from the, I'm sorry, that is incorrect. The 2% is from the NCI. And then you can see that the others are split between Dr. Lehrer, who most of you know is working with thymomas, hematology, and solid tumors. Okay, and then in terms of that's the input. The output is as seen in this slide. And again, most of the specimens that we have distributed have been tissue. Whole blood comes in second. And then basically a lot of this is hematology research with PBMCs and bone marrow specimens. And then there's a small percentage of miscellaneous other fluids, ascites, et cetera. The Komen Tissue Bank is near and dear to my heart. We are about to celebrate our 15th anniversary. When we started this bank, we had no idea that it was literally unique in the world, but it was at the time, and it remains the only biorepository of specimens donated by healthy women without evidence of breast cancer. These are core biopsies of the breasts, and as well as annotated blood specimens that are then divided into plasma and serum. So we collect fresh frozen, formalin fixed, paraffin embedded, and cryopreserved tissue, as well as blood products. So, and everything is connected through a de-identified barcode with all of the patients, with all of the donor data, as well as the data that is derived from those specimens. So actually each barcode gives you access to specimens, what's available, what type of specimen, all of the clinical annotation for that particular donor, but also, and very importantly, as those specimens are used, the data comes back to us and is in a easily accessible database where other investigators can look and see sequencing data and all sorts of other data. And the whole purpose of this was so that we would speed up breast cancer research by literally sharing basic data as it becomes available. So the bank includes, as you can see on this slide, core breast samples from over 6,400 women that do not have breast cancer, detailed annotation, including genetic ancestry. We have germline DNA from over 11,000 donors. We have digital mammograms from 1,700 donors. We have GWAS on germline DNA. We will have that. The NCI is working with us with that, but we will have GWAS on germline DNA from all of the tissue donors within about 6 months from now. And then we have some really interesting and very special specimens, and those are specimens from 142 women that we know of that donated at times where they did not have clinical breast cancer, but who developed clinical breast cancer within 3 to 4 to 5 years after donating. And so we're calling their original samples from the same breast pre-malignant samples, and special work is being done on those, as you might imagine. We also have specimens from women with predisposing genetic mutations, primarily BRCA1 and BRCA2, but also PALB2 and a variety of other predisposing mutations. We have, interestingly, we've never overtly asked for these, but women have come to us while pregnant and breastfeeding to donate samples, understanding that the understanding of the breast in its normal physiologic state, or states in the case of the breast, would be critical. And so women actually, having heard about us, approach us about donating, as I said, when they're pregnant and either same lady or other ladies when they're breastfeeding. We actually have probably a handful of women who have been committed enough to donate pregnant, serially pregnant, nursing, and involuting after nursing, which are truly kind of one of a kind. And then finally, and very importantly, the tissue bank is set up as a longitudinal study. So on an annual basis, we do update critical data points, most importantly, development of malignancies. And in some cases, we are encouraging women to donate donate tissue again, approximately every 5 years or so. ORION stands for Oncology Research Information Exchange Network. This is a consortium of 18 designated cancer centers that are set up to, the thought process being, we will all share data and specimens across institutions using a common consent and a common protocol called the Total Cancer Care Protocol. And what this does is it allows us to collect biospecimens and clinical data from patients across, basically, once they sign the consent, indefinitely until they either die or withdraw consent. So they, in the setting of a cancer patient, you do not have to reconsent them every time they have another biopsy or every time they have a surgery, that we can actually, once the pathology and all the clinically relevant specimen is taken, we can actually bank the rest of it. And most of the work that is being done is sequencing, and so then those sequences and the tissue specimens actually are shared across centers. Again, there's mainly genomic sequencing, and we actually help facilitate investigator use of the data and specimens both locally and nationally. To give you a little bit of a better sense of how this works, in 2021, almost 5,000 patients were enrolled. Of those, about 1,000 of them were specifically consented to this study, if you will, but there are 11 other protocols that roll in and can be, that basically roll into the same program. And so in those, we had 3,900 additional patients that rolled in because they were part of other studies, and those studies had already been set up to roll into this program. The 4,000 plus more eligible is there to remind me to say that basically, if we were staffed to do it, we probably could have enrolled at least 4,000 additional people into this program. And that is actually one of the goals of BC Squared in general that we'll talk about in a little bit. The Avatar program within ORION is fascinating. And so basically there is consensus by their steering committee on very specific, detailed situations. And what I mean by that is they are looking, for example, they could be looking for specimens from people who have had 3 lines of chemotherapy for their non-small cell lung cancer, and whose cancer carries this kind of a mutation, and et cetera, et cetera. And so there's we call those situations avatars. And so basically, in addition to having general total cancer care patients, there's a very specific set of specimens that's requested should this situation arise. And there was an original avatar called Avatar 1. Now we're on Avatar 2.0, which honestly is, as a clinician, I can tell you is so detailed. I advise the powers that be that they should probably be thinking of it more of as a feasibility study, because some of these situations are literally rare as hen's teeth. But the whole program was put on hold for a good while during the pandemic. Since then, we have sent 420 samples in October and are planning to send more. And again, the top part is there for general use. The Avatar shipment or the Avatar program is by contract, and again, so we are reimbursed for those, and so this is one of the ways where we have income coming in. There are some of the people requesting the avatars, the Avatar specimens are pharmaceutical companies, etc. So let me just move on. And then we have the clinical trials office. And again, these techs support the clinical trials office. Basically, they assemble tailored supply kits for whatever the study is requesting and whatever time point they're requesting it at. This can be all kinds of clinical specimens, urine, stool, bodily fluids, et cetera, in addition to tissue. And the role of this group is to prepare and process these samples and then to ship and deliver them to whichever site is the study coordinating a site. Before I go to challenges, are there any questions? Jill, do you want to take some questions?
Sure. The first question is, how does the IRB approval work for these? Do PIs need IRB approval for using samples?
The answer is the answer is yes, but they need it's an accelerated approval. The patient does not have to be reconsented. So because the specimens are de-identified, you need permission, if you will, to do the study, but it's not a full panel of approval. It's an accelerated approval.
Okay, I think expedited, is that the phrase?
Yes, thank you.
And then, do you have PBMCs in the Komen Tissue Bank?
No, we do not, and that's one of the things we're considering as we move forward. We are, as you might imagine, within all of this, but certainly with the normals, we're trying to keep up with what investigators need and also with newer technologies. And so that issue has come up and we're very strongly considering it, but so far, no.
And then do you want to, that's all the questions we have in the chat. Do you want to open it up or do you want to continue on?
No, I'll continue and then we can. So challenges to this, again, now not to the individual for components, but to us as a larger organization now. Basically, you know, it was the opposite of the perfect storm, but it was a bad perfect storm, if you will. But within a couple of months of declaring that we are a larger organization, we had a really huge unexpected staff turnover for a variety of reasons, not one thing, actually. There were family issues, et cetera. So anyway, that has resulted in our limiting our ability to supply anybody with tissue that is not within IU for now. And we plan on in first quarter to resuming that, but it is really, hiring has been a huge issue. And also just getting people that I've never worked together, learning how to work together and share jobs, if you will, and kind of cross-fertilize. It has been a real challenge, but I think, and there's always the fear of the unknown, and why did we have to change, et cetera. And so I'm really pleased to say that things are coming along, but team building, and I hate to use those words, but team building has been a real issue. And then finally, as a colleague of mine said, when you turn the lights on, you find all the cobwebs in the corners. And so we've spent a fair amount of time putting out fires. Our goals going forward are basically to review and to standardize our SOPs across the entire system. To emphasize sample annotation, this is something that we have really done very, very carefully and has always been a huge part of the Komen Tissue Bank. It has not been emphasized as much as it should be, I feel, across the rest of the bank. And so we're really working on that. This is what I wanted to talk about with respect to growing the total cancer care, if you will. But one of our main goals is to have a universal consent program. And what that means is as a new cancer patient approaching the cancer center, we would ask you to sign consent that then gives us access to your medical record, to any specimens that are collected as part of your routine care, any specimens that could be left over after any clinical trials, et cetera. So basically, this has been done in several other large cancer centers. And again, this doesn't solve the issue of the investigator needing IRB approval, and that's usually in an expedited sense, but certainly solves the issue of needing to reconsent the patient again and again and again. In other words, if I was in the system and I had, I take care of women with breast cancer. So say I had breast cancer, I had metastasis, I had a biopsy to document the metastatic lesion, I would not need to be reconsented to have a piece of that tissue also archived for general use. It's very helpful with specimen collecting. It is even more important, I feel, with access to medical records, which leads us into the next point, which is we have been tasked with developing a comprehensive cancer research database that basically allows the user to access data through the electronic medical record on a given specimen that allows us to track what specimens are available, where they are, how they've been used, and importantly, to accumulate the data that's the result data, if you will, that comes from working with the specimens. So now whether that can be accomplished under one database or whether it would be a combination, for example, some, as everyone knows, the genomic data sets are huge. And so that piece may need a separate entity that is constructed specifically to house enormous data sets, and then that links easily to a given record, if you will, a given patient. So that is an enormous task. So the bottom two are really what I see as the future of this entity, that we will have a comprehensive way to collect specimens and also to access all of the data that's associated with those specimens. This is actually my last slide, and the whole goal of this is to be obviously customer service oriented, to encourage collaborations, and to promote cross-training and teammate support. From the collaboration point of view, one thing we learned from the Komen Tissue Bank is as the people who actually saw the different requests for tissue coming in, we became kind of almost a collaboration hub that was able to connect different investigators in the KTB sense. They're all over the world actually, but different investigators with similar interests. We were able to connect them and actually have helped to foster several important collaborations that otherwise would not have happened. So my hope is that that also happens both within the IU Cancer Center as well as all of our associated colleagues across your whole system, and also elsewhere. So I think here is how to reach us and our webpage. I'm happy to take any and all questions, and we may end up giving you back some time.
All right, great. Thank you. There's several questions in the chat. I think first, just to clarify, apart from the Komen Bank, are you also collecting normal samples or other disease states other than cancer?
Not right now. There is, if and when that happens, it will come under our umbrella. There is a lot of interest in normal colon specimens, and actually there's a very, very active pancreas cancer group of investigators, and they also are interested in collecting normal samples through procedures. And again, I think having done it with breast, I think we can certainly establish the infrastructure to get the other efforts going as well. But again, you can imagine doing that independently was just silly. You know, if the colon people want to go ahead and start something, they can work with the people that are within the KTB, and the KTB people can help them out. And it just makes sense to learn from each other and take advantage of each other's expertise, which is why this entire thing was started.
Great. So question, do you extract DNA from whole blood and store the DNA? Is that available to investigators to just get DNA?
Well, if I split things up, we do absolutely do that for every donor to the normal breast tissue bank. As part of the universal consent and total cancer care, if you will, there will be some kind of baseline tubes that'll be collected, and yes, those then, and one of the reasons for that would be to extract germline DNA. So that is indeed the plan. But right now, I would say sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not, and depends on, I think when it's there, it's been specifically asked for. I think what's been happening in tissue procurement generally is not DNA, is not blood, but usually just the tissue from surgery. Yeah.
Okay, and so the next question is, how quickly are the solid tumors flash frozen after resection or biopsy?
That's a great question. The reason I paused is I'm going to look at Jill for a minute. That's one of the SOPs that I really want to delve into. If you asked me that, and the fact that I can't give you an answer bothers me. If you asked me that about the normal tissue specimens, I would tell you that within 5 minutes, no question, within 5 minutes, every single specimen is flash frozen from time of exit of body into liquid nitrogen is less than 5 minutes. Now, in the operating room, and I'm not a surgeon, so I don't mean to offend anyone, but there's always the bucket time. And, the specimen is up in the bucket, and I would say that in situations, again, where tissue has been specifically requested, and it has been requested in a flash frozen capacity, that tissue is managed by the SOP that came along with the request. But again, in general, if you look at our archived tissue bank, those are all fixed. Those are all formalin fixed specimens. So there actually is no flash frozen bank of tumors unless you've specifically asked.
And is that something that you would document the time?
Yes.
Yeah. Related to that, there's a question about, do pathologists confirm solid tumor tissue after resection, or do you rely on the surgeon's assessment of the tissue samples?
The pathology. So it's the process goes through pathology and then to us. So yeah.
Okay. And then a question about, does the cancer center potentially have access to urine from patients who contracted COVID or suffered from kidney injury?
I doubt it. We have a COVID protocol, but we're not collecting, it's not based on collecting tissue specimens. So the answer is no.
Yeah, I think the Indiana Biobank is collecting samples from COVID patients. I'm not clear if they're collecting urine, but you could contact the Indiana Biobank for those questions. And then do you have an expected date of when our collaborating universities, let's say Notre Dame, Purdue, would be able to potentially request access to samples?
I would let them do it now.
I would, our hesitation, we would right now is the answer. Our hesitation has been when we have had to push people away, it's been pharma, and I really wanted to prioritize our network. So when I said us, I meant us in a big sense. So you can ask for tissue now.
Great. And then are there plans to collect samples from minor patients?
There are some driving ones.
There are.
Yeah, I don't know very much about it, but there are some.
We do have, apparently we do have specimens from minors. We don't have a lot of them, but they are there. And actually, does Riley have its own?
Maybe.
And Riley, you might have, Riley, I think routinely does. So, but here it would be, it would be sarcoma patients that happen to be younger than 18, et cetera. It's our population, which is not minors. So I would go to Riley for that.
And I think just another question is just a clarification. I think you might have mentioned that you collected germline DNA, but really you were referring to somatic DNA of the blood cells.
Yes.
Yes. And so that's all the questions in the chat. If people would like to raise their hand or unmute themselves, you're welcome to ask a question. While we're waiting for that, I just had a couple questions. One is how, maybe you could just describe how someone would go about requesting samples or even just viewing what samples are already available.
Across, and we're talking about cancer specimens?
Yeah, or if there's different mechanisms for different groups of samples.
Just a minute, Jill's coming.
Hi. There is a website that Tissue Procurement has that needs updating, but right now it's just in its old form, that you can find by going to the IEPY website and just searching Tissue Procurement. And that should give you like what's available, the cost schedule, how to submit a proposal, and any other things that you might want answered.
Great. And so that's from the CTSI Access Technology Hub page, and then they can get the tissue procurement core, and then they can find that link.
Yep.
Yeah. And then if an investigator, is there a procedure for prioritizing requests? Let's say you have a limited number of certain samples. How do you decide whether the study is, let's say, worthy of having
Well,
those?
it's interesting. I'm looking at the process for cancer specimens actively right now, and I'll tell you how we solved that just a couple of weeks ago. But if in the setting of the normal breast specimens, the Komen Tissue Bank has a proposal, and part of the proposal, you have to say how many specimens of what type you want, and it's that proposal then is circulated to 3 independent reviewers, and one of the jobs of the reviewer is to assess, again in the setting of normals, whether that the idea or the research warrants use of a precious resource. Now, tumor specimens, unfortunately or fortunately, are less precious. But a few weeks ago, we had several investigators, three investigators that were interested in literally the same samples. And we basically brought them Zooming together, and they chatted with each other about, all 3, it's not for me to decide how worthwhile your research is, but what the purpose of the meeting was so that they could talk about their ideas. It turned out that they themselves came up with a prioritization, and actually in one case they were going to collaborate. So I think if in the settings that happens, I think we are going to either try that or or bring it to a again, an independent expert in the field who may have to make the call. But it would, these were pancreas cancer samples, and again, it turned out not to be an issue at all. So I think if you're interested in a specific, if you know prospectively exactly what you want, the best way to approach this is to basically write a proposal requesting them. And what happens is we collect them, and then historically you are charged storage fees, collection fees, whatever, when you on the other end take them from us to use in your work. So that's when you accrue all of the expense. But if there's if there's a very specific way that you need the tissue processed, or if you're interested in a tumor type that that right now is not being emphasized, I think probably prospectively, if you have the time, that would be the way to approach the less common situations.
So I didn't talk about how to get samples from the case. I want to talk about that.
Yeah, go ahead. Just a sec.
So when you were talking about requesting samples, I only really just answered how to request samples from the tumor bank, but we have the process for the Komen Tissue Bank on the Komen Tissue Bank's website, which is komentissuebank.iu.edu. And there's a researcher tab with a lot of information, again, about pricing and about how to request samples and what kind of samples are available and things like that.
Okay.
So does anyone have a question? So, well, if not, I think this has been a great presentation. Thank you.
Jill, I wanted one more thing. I just wanted to emphasize that I would like to be able to run this larger core the way we ran the Komen Tissue Bank. And so we went out of our way to actually help the investigator with whatever he or she needed or wanted. And so I would, if for the investigators out there, I would make no assumptions, and we are really interested and anxious to help you out. So that's the whole reason we're here. We're only going to get better by knowing what we could be doing, that we're not doing, etc. And so in that respect, I would really encourage you all to just let us know what you need. And if we can't get it to you right away, we can at least work towards that. PBMCs is an example, for example. Anyway, thank you. I didn't want to prolong things, but I really wanted to emphasize that we are really fluid and very, very flexible.
Well, great. Thank you. This is really a great resource. Thank you for doing it.
Thank you.
All right. Thank
Bye
you,
now.
everyone.